Hi, Revive fam. Welcome back to another chat. Today, we are going to continue our series in purpose, talking about comparison. This is a part two to comparison. So, before we jump into today's word, welcome to all of our first time visitors. If you are new to joining our family, listening to our channel, welcome to the Revive Ministries channel. And I ask that you do three things. First thing, if you're listening to this and you are finding that, I like this. This is something that I need. Go ahead and like this channel. That's number one. The second thing I ask you to do is to share this. If while you're listening to this word, you feel that you know someone who could benefit from listening to this video, go ahead and share it with them. We are not stingy here at Revive Ministries. We want everyone to win in their walk with Christ. Third thing I ask you to do is subscribe to our channel. Subscribe to our channel so that you do not miss out on anything that God shares with me to share with you, my family. So welcome to Revive Ministries, and we are glad to have you as a part of our family. Now, if you are already a member of the Revive family, the B2L, Back to Life family, welcome back to another chat. I'm so glad to be with you again, to get together like we do and just discuss what God is sharing with us to help us to elevate in our journey and our walk with Him. So family, if you're new, welcome to our family. You're now a part of our family. And if you're already a part of our family, welcome back. Let's jump right on into what God wants us to hear today. So we've been on this series about purpose. And last week we talked about comparison. And I thought that, last week was the end of the stretch of comparison, but it's not. We are, today we'll have a part two about comparison. Now, today's video is not about the side of comparison of the person who is doing the comparison, but in today's video, we will discuss the other side of comparison, the perspective of the individual who is being compared, and how to deal with that. How do I handle that? Because, there are many times we talk about comparison and we're like, yeah, well, this person is, comparing, or you see a situation where comparison is happening and you're more of the focus is on, why are they doing that? I don't understand why they're acting like that. But today's video is going to focus on the other side of it. When you're being compared, how should you handle it? What should you do? So let's hop right on in to today's chat. Comparison Kills Part 2, the other side of comparison. So have you ever felt that you were being compared? Have you ever had that feeling? You're like, you know what? And you may not even be 100% sure, but there's something inside. You see the patterns of a person and, you're like, there's some comparison going on here. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever had that feeling that someone was just trying to do what you do, or they're watching you? They're always watching you to see what you're doing. Or have you ever had that feeling where like there's a third party that's kind of low key comparing you to someone else, using a way of comparison, not really upfront in your face doing it, but it's like I said, a low key comparison. Have you ever felt that? If you have, this video is for you. If you felt that and you're like, you know what? I don't know why they're doing this. What's going on? I mean, what do I do? This video is for you. So if you have experienced this, you will know that it's not comfortable. It's not being in a comfortable situation when you know that you are being compared. And whether it's a coworker, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, it's just not a comfortable situation. And the thing about it is, it can be the smallest thing that's being compared. And you sit back, you're like, okay, why are you even doing that? What's the point? But it can be the smallest thing that someone uses to compare you to someone else. And if you're a parent or someone who is responsible for a child in some way, you will understand what I'm about to say. So say you have a bag of candy and the bag of candy has 11 pieces. How do you divide it between the kids? So if you have 2 kids and you have 11 pieces of candy, how do you divide it? I'll tell you. You're going to give each child what? 5 pieces. And then you'll have 1 piece left over. And you'll either keep it for yourself or you give it to someone else. Now, how do you divide it if you have 5 children? So remember, 5 children, 11 pieces of candy. In this instance, you'll divide it. Each child gets 2 pieces of candy, which makes 10. And then you have that 1 piece left over for yourself or for somebody else. We give equal amounts to avoid anyone comparing or having one child question, well, why do they have more than I have? You make it a fair playing game, right? And I know this sounds small and it sounds insignificant, but think about how something as small as this can easily allow comparison to set in over time. If you're the child who's always questioning, well, why did they get more than I got? Why do you have this? Why do you have that? That starts that seed of comparison because you're looking to see what someone else has. Small and insignificant, but it can fester over time. So if we go back to last week's chat about Saul and David, if we go back to the moment Saul allowed comparison to set in, it was with something as small as a song. So remember when Saul and the army came back from defeating Goliath and they were entering the town and people were celebrating the big win. Remember the people were chanting the song, Saul has killed 1,000 enemies and David has killed 10,000 enemies. That was the song they were chanting. So we all know David is the one that killed Goliath, right? Saul was the king. He was in charge of the army, but David actually killed Goliath. So can you imagine as they're actually walking back into the town, Saul is proud because he's king and he's like, okay, you know, we've done something great. We have this great victory. And as he's entering in, he hears everybody saying Saul has killed 1,000 enemies and David has killed 10,000. Saul was feeling some kind of way. So we talked about that last week. And if you hadn't had a chance to listen to part 1, go back and listen to part 1. So at this very moment with that small song, a song with only 2 lines, 2 verses, that is when Saul allowed comparison to set in. He allowed it to grow and overtake him to the point that after he heard that song, he never trusted David again. And you're probably like, but what did David do? And that's the point. David did nothing. Saul allowed comparison to set in. So after this, Saul made it his mission to kill David. So here's where we jump into the other side of comparison, from the perspective of the one who is being compared. And in this case, it's David. So Saul spent years and years and years chasing David with the hopes of killing him, but he was never successful in doing it. While Saul could never get close enough to David to kill him, David had a few opportunities to take Saul out. But the thing is, even though he had the chance, he chose not to. And we're gonna pick up with 1 Samuel chapter 24. Now, I am going to read 1 Samuel 24, the whole chapter, just to give you context of what we're going to discuss. And I will be reading from the Contemporary English Version. So bear with me as I read it. It's 22 verses, so bear with me. So 1 Samuel 24. When Saul got back from fighting off the Philistines, he heard that David was in the desert around En-Gedi. Saul led 3,000 of Israel's best soldiers out to look for David and his men near Wild Goat Rocks in En-Gedi. There were some sheep pens along the side of the road, and one of them was built around the entrance to a cave. Saul went into the cave to relieve himself. David and his men were hiding at the back of the cave. They whispered to David, "The Lord told you he was going to let you defeat your enemies and do whatever you want with them. This must be the day the Lord was talking about." David sneaked over and cut off a small piece of Saul's robe, but Saul didn't even notice a thing. Afterwards, David was sorry that he had even done that. He then told his men, "Stop talking foolishly. We're not going to attack Saul. He's my king, and I pray that the Lord will keep me from doing anything to harm his chosen king." Because remember, God did choose Saul to be king. Saul left the cave and started down the road. Soon, David also got up and left the cave. "Your Majesty," he shouted from a distance. So Saul turns back around and looks. David bows down very low and says, "Your Majesty, why do you listen to people who say that I'm trying to harm you? You can see for yourself that the Lord gave me the chance to catch you in the cave today. Some of my men wanted to kill you, but I wouldn't let them do it. I told them I will not harm the Lord's chosen king. Your Majesty, look at what I'm holding. You can see that it's a piece of your robe. If I could cut off a piece of your robe, I could have killed you, but I let you live. And that should prove I'm not trying to harm you or to rebel. I haven't done anything to you, and yet you keep trying to ambush me and kill me. I'll let the Lord decide which one of us has done right. I pray that the Lord will punish you for what you're doing to me, but I won't do anything to you. An old proverb says, only evil people do evil things, and so I won't harm you. Why should the king of Israel be out chasing me? Am I as worthless as a dead dog or a flea? I pray that the Lord will help me escape and show that I am in the right. David, my son, is that you? Asked Saul. Then Saul started crying and said, David, you're a better person than I am. You treated me with kindness even though I've been cruel to you. You told me how you were kind enough not to kill me when the Lord gave you the chance. If you really were my enemy, you wouldn't have let me leave here alive. I pray that the Lord will give you a big reward for what you did today. I realize now that you will be the next king, and a powerful king at that. Promise me this, David, with the Lord as your witness, that you won't wipe out my descendants. Let them live to keep my family name alive. So David promised, and Saul went home, and David and his men returned to their hideout. Now, let's go back to verse 4. If we go back to verse 4, it says, David sneaked over and cut off a small piece of Saul's robe, but Saul didn't notice a thing. So David was so close to Saul at this moment, and Saul had no idea that David was right in his personal space. David could have taken him out. Saul had no idea. And at this moment, David could have put an end to this situation with Saul. It would have been over, done, no more comparison. He could have ended things so that he could have returned back to his home with his family. He could have ended things so that he wouldn't have to spend his life running from Saul and hiding out. David cut a small piece of Saul's robe. And when he did that, you got to think about it. He cut that piece, and think about it. You're right there. You know there's this person right in front of you who's trying to kill you. And you have the chance, the opportunity to take them out so you don't have to suffer anymore. David had that choice. And he cut that piece of Saul's robe. But when he did it, he knew that was not the way God wanted him to move. He knew it wasn't right. It felt in the natural from his emotions. It did feel like the right thing to do because at that point, he wouldn't have to be in hiding. But he knew that that was not the way God wanted him to respond. The Bible tells us that afterwards, David was sorry that he cut off a small piece of Saul's robe. And he had to tell those around him, all of his boys, all the men, he had to tell them around him, stop talking foolishly. Just stop it, because we're not going to attack Saul. And this is a side note about listening to those who are in your ear or who are around you. Be careful of the advice that those around you give, especially when you're in a situation where you know you may be emotional. And you know that in this situation, you're being unfairly treated. So it's very critical that as people are talking to you, as people are in your ear, that you discern what is actually the voice of God. And if you even need to listen to them or be around them or get their advice. So be careful of the advice that those around you give. You can have people around you who are pushing you to make a move that may sound sensible, but it's not a God-led move. Be cautious. That's just a side note. So David could have listened to those around him. He could have sided with what he felt and allowed those around him to hype him up and, stay in his feelings. And he could have reacted based on his emotions and took Saul out. But he chose not to. Instead of reacting with his emotions and feelings, he responded. There's a difference between reacting and responding. So here's how David responds. He leaves the cave where Saul was occupying. And he puts enough space between him and Saul so that there was distance, but if he started to speak, Saul would hear him. So David yells out, "Your Majesty." And Saul identifies David's voice. David asks Saul, "Why do you listen to people who say that I am trying to harm you?" Again, be careful of who's in your ear. David says, "I had the chance to kill you today. I am holding a piece of your robe. Look at what I have here. I cut off a piece of your robe. That's how close I was to you. I could have taken you out. You didn't even realize it." Some of my men wanted to take you out, but I told them no. I had to tell them to back down. I let you live. Doesn't that show you I'm not trying to hurt you, Saul? I'm on your side. So why are you trying to kill me? I have not done anything to you. And if we look at verse 12, we go to verse 12. Verse 12 says, I'll let the Lord decide. This is what David is saying. I'll let the Lord decide which one of us has done right. Reaction. Had David went with his emotions and his feelings and killed Saul, that would have been a result of reacting, responding. I'll let the Lord decide which one of us has done right. That was David's response. I'm not going to kill you, Saul. I'm not going to touch you. Yes, I cut this small piece of your robe, but even that wasn't right. I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to let the Lord decide which one of us is right in this situation. You don't take things into your own hands, but you give it to God and you allow him to work it out. That's what David did. You let God have the final say and direct you on how to respond to someone who does not have your best interest at heart. So Saul then acknowledges that he's wrong. Saul knows he's in the wrong. And the Bible tells us that Saul starts crying. Why is he crying? He knows he's wrong. He knows David did nothing to him. He knows that how he's treating David is not the way he's supposed to treat him. Saul tells David, if you were really my enemy, you would not have let me live. Because if someone really was an enemy and had just had no remorse, they would have killed Saul. That would have been the end. Saul says, I pray that the Lord will give you a big reward for what you did. David, you let me live. You had the chance to kill me, but you let me live. Saul then tells David that he realizes that David will be the next king. And he asks David to let his descendants live, to keep his family name alive. So David promises Saul, sure, I will let your family name live. I will let your family live to keep your name alive. I won't harm your family. And Saul goes his way. David goes his way. That's how it ends. Now, after this, it seems like, okay, they're cool now. David can go back to doing what he was doing, knowing that Saul is not hunting him down, trying to chase him and kill him. But that's not what happened. People went running back to Saul to tell Saul where David was camping out. Saul heard that David was camping out in a nearby city. Now, keep this in mind, though. Again, be careful of who is running to you, telling you stuff. Because Saul has these people running him, telling, hey, I know where David is. I know where he's camped out. Well, at this point, it was left off as Saul went his way, David went his way. The last thing Saul said was, David, I know your heart. I know you're not trying to harm me. I know you're going to be king. So please just let my family live. Let my name live. And David promised, and that was it. So that's how it left off. Be careful of who's coming back to you talking. Because in them coming back to you, adding fuel to a dead situation, it can resurface things that you thought were dead. And this is what happened. Those people who were running to Saul, telling him where David was, they were starting to reignite those feelings of comparison in Saul. And when you go back to what we discussed last week about how comparison can become an infection, that if it's untreated, it will just grow and fester. This is what happened in this case. And although Saul did have the first encounter with David, and David chose not to kill Saul, Saul listening to the other people and getting in his feelings and allowing that comparison to fester. As people were coming to him, David's here, David's here. He reacted instead of responding. And what does he do? He goes looking for David. So I'm not going to read 1 Samuel 26. You can go and read that on your own. But I'll tell you what happened. So Saul goes looking for David. People went to Saul telling him that David was hiding out in Mount Hachilah. What Saul did not know was that David was actually hiding out in the desert. So people were running to Saul telling them, oh, he's in Mount Hachilah. He's in Mount Hachilah. There he is. You can go get him if you want to, because we know where he is. But see, they didn't know his exact location. So get this. So David's hiding out, and he hears that Saul was close. So David sends some of his men to spy on Saul to see what Saul and his men are up to. And here's another side note. This is why it's important to make sure that your heart is right and that you're striving to have the heart of God. Because look at what Saul had no idea of what David had no idea of what Saul was doing. He had no idea that Saul was still trying to come and kill him. After their last encounter, David was like, oh, okay, we're good. Saul acknowledged that he was going to be the next king. Saul acknowledged that he knew David was not trying to harm him. And when they last left off, David promised Saul that he would allow his family to live and he would allow his name to live. He wouldn't touch Saul's family. So David is thinking, okay, it's all good. But God sent someone to alert David to let him know what Saul was up to. When you maintain the heart of God and when you're striving to walk in the characteristics of Christ, God will always send people your way to help you along, to alert you to what is going on. And this is what happened in this case. And even when you have no idea of what those who are against you are up to, God will send people your way to let you know how he wants you to respond. So Saul is probably thinking, okay, we're going to do a surprise attack we're going to do a surprise attack on David. And here God has already shown David that Saul is in the area. So it was no surprise. Remember, God knows all. God knows all. God sees all. So David is probably like at this point, once they're coming back telling him, okay, David, Saul he's coming after you. David is probably like, didn't I already go through this? Didn't we just have this discussion? And I can see, just picture David's like, I already told Saul I don't have beef with him. So why is he coming for me? We settled this thing. So what's going on? So David goes to Saul's camp with Abishai. Now, Abishai was that one that when you say, let's do this, he's all in. He's that one family member or friend that you have that when you say something is going down, Oh, they're ready. No questions asked. They've got your back. So David and Abishai go to Saul's camp, and they see Saul and all of his soldiers sleeping. So Abishai looks at David. He looks at him. He's like, dude, okay, it's time. And he says to David, he's like, David, you don't have to do a thing. I got this. Abishai looks at him and says, I'll pin Saul down to the ground with one thrust of my spear. Abishai's ready. He's like, David, I got you. You don't even have to do this. You let me handle Saul. And David, a man after God's own heart, looks up at Abishai and says, don't kill him. Don't kill him. So you can imagine Abishai all in, ready to take Saul out. He's like, David, we're in the position. I got this. I can do this. What do you mean don't kill him? David takes Saul's spear and grabs his water jar, and David and Abishai leave the camp. Can you imagine that? Again, you have the chance to eliminate all the drama that you're having to go through with hiding out and not seeing your family. And not just that, this time you don't even have to do it. Your boy is with you. Your A1 is there, and he's like, you know what, Saul? You don't have to do this. I got you. We in this together. I got you. And you look up at him and you say, I can't do this. Don't kill him. I can't. It doesn't sit right with me. That's not how God made me. I'm not built for that. Leave him alone. Don't kill him. So, just like before, David gets far enough from Saul that he can't see him, but he can hear him. And David yells out to Abner, who is Saul's commander. He yells out, Abner, can you hear me? And Abner shouts out, who disturbs the king? David says to Abner, what kind of man are you? Aren't you supposed to be the best soldier in Israel? Saul could have been killed tonight. You nor your men protected him. Y'all sitting here asleep. Look to see if you can find Saul's spear and the water jar that's near his head. Look and see if you can find it. Go ahead. Can you find it? No, you can't, because I have it right here. I was close enough again to take him out, and I didn't. Saul knew that the voice he heard was the voice of David. Saul asked David, my son, is that you? David responds, yes, your majesty, still respectful, still respecting the authority that Saul walks in. Then David proceeds to ask Saul, why are you hunting me down? Didn't we go through this? Haven't we had this discussion? Have I done something wrong? Have I committed a crime? What is it that I have done that you feel like you need to chase me? I thought we settled this before. David says to Saul, please listen to what I have to say. If the Lord has turned you against me, maybe a sacrifice will make him change his mind. If people have turned you against me, I hope the Lord will punish them, because they're the ones starting all this confusion. God is not the author of confusion. David is making a genuine plea to Saul to let him know, dude, I'm not against you, bro. I am not trying to harm you. So why are you coming for me? I did nothing to you. Saul responds as before. David, you had the chance to kill me today, but you didn't. I was very wrong about you, and I made a mistake for trying to kill you. Saul admits that he acted like a fool, and he vows that he will never come after David again. Saul says, "You're like a son to me, David. Please come back." David tells Saul, "Have one of your soldiers come and get your spear. The Lord put you in my power today, but you are his chosen king, and I wouldn't harm you. The Lord rewards people who are faithful and live right." The Lord rewards people who are faithful and who live right. Although Saul was chasing David and trying to kill him, because he was comparing himself, he allowed that comparison to set in. Although Saul was trying to take David out, and David knew exactly what Saul was doing. Although David had opportunities to take Saul out, he chose to live right. He chose to live with the heart of God. The Lord rewards people who are faithful and live right. And that's why, through all of this, through everything David went through, at the end, he was appointed as king. The Lord rewards people who are faithful and live right. Because he didn't retaliate, because he didn't react, the Lord honored how he responded. Let's think about this. Had David killed Saul, I mean, we don't know, but would God have trusted him to be the king had he gone outside of what God wanted him to do? Had he chosen to lead off of his feelings and emotions or listen to other people's advice? Would David have reached the point of being appointed as king? But because he was faithful to God, he knew God didn't want him to kill Saul. God chose Saul as king. And David's like, you know what? God, you chose him. I'm not going to be the one to take him out. I'm going to let you deal with it. I'm just going to continue living the way you instruct me to. And I'm letting you deal with it. And because he did that, he was rewarded. The other side of comparison. It is not always easy to operate from a place of love. It's not. Even as a Christian, even when you have relationship with Christ, it's not always easy to operate in love. And sometimes people think, well, you're a Christian, you have a relationship with God, you're always supposed to be, you're walking in love, but we're human. That's why the Bible says that daily we have to crucify our flesh. It doesn't say, well, once you give your life to Christ, everything is going to be fine. You're just going to be this sweet person and, love everybody. And you have moments, because we're human, we're not perfect, that even trying to make the right choice, and not the right choice, the God choice, can be a challenge. Because you still do have those feelings and emotions that you have to die to and say, okay, God, I die to myself, to my flesh, to my emotions. And I want you to show me what you would want me to do in this situation. So when you know that someone is against you, when you know that someone has allowed comparison to set in and fester, it's not always easy to respond. especially when you may know something, or maybe you have a one up, or maybe you're in a position like David. You have the opportunity to take it out, and that is, I don't mean killing or destroying their life, but what I mean is you have an opportunity that will stop them from doing what they're doing to you. And God is like, even though you have that opportunity, is that really the right thing to do? Is that how I would instruct you to move? You can find yourself in a situation where you want to react, especially when you know that you have no ill intent towards the other person. You may want to call your Abishai, your family member, or your friend that you know has your back and is all in with whatever you decide to do. All you have to do is say the word and they're like, let's do it. No questions asked. But because you're like David, a man after God's own heart, a woman after God's own heart, you just can't move that way. Something inside you is like, you know what? I can't do this. As much as my feelings, my feelings and emotions get all in the mix of it. And, I do feel like I want to do this. I can't move that way. That's the Holy Spirit inside of you. You have the understanding that God has the final say. You choose to respond the way He instructs you, not how others instruct you, not out of your feelings and emotions, but how He leads you to respond. And you allow Him to bring resolution to that situation of comparison. Romans 12:17 through 19 says, don't mistreat someone who has mistreated you. This is the contemporary English version. Don't mistreat someone who has mistreated you, but try to earn the respect and do your best to live at peace with everyone. Dear friends, don't try to get even. Don't even try it. Let God take revenge. In the scriptures, the Lord says, I am the one to take revenge and pay them back. And this is exactly what David did. Saul mistreated him once comparison set in. Saul chased David into hiding. He made it his mission to kill David. But the thing about it, David never wished any ill intent on Saul. Even when David had the opportunity to end Saul's life, he didn't. He left the fate of Saul in God's hands. And we know what happened to Saul. Saul killed himself. He killed himself. The same thing he was trying to do to David. He was trying to kill David. He ended up killing himself. Earning the respect of others that mistreat you looks like you taking the God road and saying, how would Jesus respond? We can't react out of emotions or feelings. You may want to, and I've been there. You may want to, but before you react, you have to learn to respond. And I remember back in the day, maybe it was like late 80s, early 90s. I remember the bracelets, WWJD, what would Jesus do? Sometimes we have to take a pause before we do something and ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? When you take that second to pause and ask yourself, what would Jesus do? That gives you an opportunity to respond as opposed to reacting and making things worse for you and for the other person. There's one part, though, how David responded. And I want to take note of this because sometimes people think, well, as a Christian, I just brush it off and I'll just love them. And to an extent, that is true. We're supposed to love one another. But God wants you to use wisdom. And there was one part in this second encounter that David had with Saul, where Saul says to David, "You're my son. You're like a son to me. Please come back." And do you see how David responded to that? Go back and read 1 Samuel 26 and see how David responded to that. When Saul said, "You're like a son to me, please come back," this is what you heard. Crickets. There was silence. David didn't even respond to that statement. He was using wisdom while still earning Saul's respect. Because you think about it, at that point, David was probably like, you chased me around. I'm in hiding. I can't be with my family. I can't be with my friends. I'm a nomad because of you, because you're trying to kill me. And you're now saying, "Please come back. You're like a son to me." You know what? That's cool and all, but nah, can't do that. I respect you, but I can't do that. This was David. I forgive you and we can move on. But it's not that type of party. Now, if God reunites us and brings it back to the place where I truly feel like a son to you, I am in. I'm all in. But it has to be the hand of God that puts us back together. Until then, I forgive you. And I pray that God blesses you. This is the other side of comparison. I forgive you. I love you with the love of God. I pray that God will bless you. And I'm using wisdom when it comes to my interactions with you. That's the other side of comparison. The last part of 1 Samuel tells us that Saul says to David, "David, my son, I pray that the Lord will bless you and make you successful." When you don't make moves to get even, and when you allow God to move in situations where people are not for you, He turns it around where the very people who were planning your demise or wishing for you to fail will be the very ones who end up speaking blessings over your life. Psalm 110:1 tells us, He makes your enemies your footstools. Take a page from David when you are the one who is being compared. Take a page from him. Maintain the heart of God and let God place you in the position that He created you for. Even as you are going through this, others will see the gifts and talents that God placed inside of you. You may not notice that they notice, but they will. And when God seats you in position, just like when David was appointed king, and the people said that David was already operating in the capacity of king while Saul was still appointed as king, people will know that you have everything you need because they've watched you. They will know you have everything you need to carry out the purpose that God has for you, because you have already shown and proven that you were created for this. The other side of comparison. Forgive, love, use wisdom, and continue walking in God's purpose for your life. Do not let the emotions of someone else, the comparison, the envy, the jealousy that someone else has, do not allow that to stop you from being obedient, hearing the voice of God, and walking into the purpose that He has for you. Because that's all the enemy wants. He uses people as distractions. And next week, we will be talking about distractions. But he uses others, he uses people and situations as distractions to pull you away from your purpose, because the enemy doesn't want you to walk in purpose. He doesn't want you to be in place with where God has for your life, because that affects him. Don't allow comparison from other people to derail your destiny and the path that God has for your life. Heart fam, that's the other side of comparison. We all can take a page from David and make sure that as we're responding, not reacting, as we're responding to those who are comparing us, that we're still walking in a heart of love, a man, a woman after God's own heart. And we have to allow God to be the one to intervene as we're staying focused on what he has for us individually to do. Revive fam, I pray that this word blesses you, and that it helps you to continue walking in purpose, because it's not easy walking in purpose, and you will encounter, as you're walking in purpose, you will notice and you will encounter situations where you'll notice that people are maybe, and sometimes it's not always intentional, but there will be some type of comparison. And it's like, you don't have to do that. It goes back to walking in purpose and understanding why God created you. God created each of us for a specific purpose. And when each of us understands that each of us have individual traits and characteristics that God has placed inside of us, we won't have to compare ourselves to someone else, because we will know that we are uniquely made. God didn't make you like someone else. God didn't make someone else identical to you. Even twins, they may look alike, but they're not identical. They don't have identical purposes. So understand that comparison does kill. And as you're walking in purpose, continue to set your gaze. We've been talking about setting your gaze, your focus. Continue setting your gaze on God. And as you do that, and you're not focused on others, you will walk out the plan that God has for your life. Revive fam, I love you all. And one more thing before we get off. Last week I posted, if you're on the journey to wholeness, our Bible readings. Last week I posted all of the readings for the month of November. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, you can access it through our Facebook page, Instagram page, TikTok page, or in our community post on YouTube. I've posted the scriptures for this month. So if you haven't, go ahead and start reading the scriptures for this month, and just continue on that journey, because the more and more you read the word of God, the more and more you will understand God, and you'll be able to fully operate in the way and the plans that he has for your life. So Revive fam, I love you all, and until next chat, be blessed.